It's my great pleasure to welcome you all tonight to our curriculum night. I'm really excited to see so many of you here, and I'm really excited to be putting on this night in collaboration with our faculty and staff who did so much planning and work, and it was so fun to peek into the classrooms and see actual lessons going on with you guys in the chairs that your children are usually in. It is an amazing time to be at this school. I'm going to apologize briefly to the early childhood folks who may have heard me say this already, but I'm going to say it again. As a faculty and staff, we are living with this question of what it means to be a Waldorf school right now in this time and place for the students that are coming through our doors, so for your children. And we are living with that question in an everyday way and in a really real way. And as we live with it, what is being reaffirmed for us is our deep commitment to Waldorf education and its philosophy, and to our deep commitment to bringing our academic offerings in a way that align with best practices and the newest research in child development, and really looking at how children actually learn. And as we look at these two commitments, I think what we find is that they are not in any way at odds with one another. In fact, very often, the latest research in child development or the latest research on how children best learn skill development align with what we have been doing and what we have been offering. So it's really an exciting time to be here in this community at this school. And what we are bringing tonight is an update for all of you in the ways in which we are bringing our academic offerings. And as educators, our faculty knows that there's always more to learn, there's always growth, and there's always an ability to strengthen. And we have some wonderful updates that we've made to our literacy offerings and our math curriculum that both align with Waldorf philosophy and align with best practices and what we know about the science behind how children learn. So to update you on our academic offerings, I'm so very pleased to introduce our pedagogical coordinator, Abigail Deal Noble. I know you all know her, but she's been teaching here for 19 years. She's a Rhodes Scholar. She was educated at Oxford, and she has a master's in English. She has taught in our middle school, primarily in English. She's taught in our high school, and now she's our 5th grade class teacher. And she's going to focus tonight on literacy, but she's also going to update you on our math curriculum.
Thank you for coming out tonight, and I am really excited to talk about these two things that Emily just named. That is, what are the strengths that have always been part of Waldorf education, the strengths that drew you, that made you want to have your child here, many of which have been reaffirmed by neuroscience and best practices in education, and then what are those changes, those tweaks that we're making. But before we do any of that, I want to tell you a tiny story about how I found Waldorf, which was a very long time ago because I was 25. And for me, I like to come back to this occasionally because it reinforces the why. The why I'm a teacher here, the why my 3 children went through this school, the why of it all. And when I was 25, I was a counselor at Circus Smirkus, a youth circus in Northeast Vermont. And it was a great job because I got to spend the summers with 40 kids between the ages of 12 and 18, touring around on the bus, performing 2 shows a day at different little New England towns, and they were performers, and it was amazing to be with such artistic, dedicated kids. I loved it. I always loved being around artists. And I noticed there was a group of kids that really stood out from the others, and I asked what it was, and I found out they were all seniors at a Waldorf high school, High Mowing. It turned out High Mowing had a circus arts program, and a lot of circus kids came into Circus Smirkus. And here's what I saw. We had a food bus where it was refitted as a kitchen, and that was the traveling kitchen. And every day, 3 times a day, the kids went past the food bus and got the food. And they were teenagers, and they were so hungry. They were working so hard, and they would just pile their plates and move on. And there were these 5 teenagers, and they always did something else. They looked behind them first, and they saw how many kids still had to eat. And they adjusted how much they took based on that. They cut a banana in half if there were a whole bunch of kids behind them and there was only one bunch. These were also the kids who knew how to take care of themselves in a really grueling environment. They knew when they needed to take time by themselves. They apologized if they snapped at someone. They knew how to be in community. They knew how to be with themselves. I was 25, taking care of a bunch of teenagers, and I realized I wanted to grow up and be like those 16-year-olds. And so I did what I think all of the teachers in a Waldorf school do, is I found a Waldorf school, and I've had the joy of working here for almost 20 years, and it's true, it's almost as good as getting this education yourself. It's been a transformative journey for me, and I think it is for parents as well. We're all really lucky to get to be a part of this, and I hope you feel that for your children as well. So, what is Waldorf education? For many of us, the thing that sort of first drew us was either a feeling, and I'm going to come back to that feeling, or an aesthetic. And I want to acknowledge how beautiful the aesthetic is. And when we think of Waldorf, we think of pretty plant-dyed silks and knitted gnomes and block crowns and beautiful blackboard drawings. And I love all those things. And I'm here to tell you, we could do this education without any of them. And when we get too stuck on those aesthetics, then we can lose sight of what it's really about, what Steiner was really talking about 100 years ago. Because when we strip all those things away, we come back to the people. And that, I hope, is why you want your child to be here, because this is a relationship-based education where we see the whole child. So what is Waldorf? We've been working really hard on this question at this school over the last several years, and I have a few gems. I think it's way too big of a question to know for sure, but here are some of the things that we've derived at. It is, as Emily said, teaching the way kids really learn in a way that engages their whole body and their whole mind and their whole heart so that they don't forget. Because what you take in at that level, you'll remember forever. It is integrating the arts and academics and movement so that learning comes alive. It is never dead. It is never deadening. Steiner said, and I love this, if the children yawn, you're doing something wrong. It should be, learning is the most natural thing in the world, and it should be exciting. It is the teachers looking at the children in front of us and looking for what they need and using the cues they give us to respond. This is a deeply responsive education. And it's keeping in mind the whole child, the whole class, the whole family, the whole community. It's truly holistic. So, since that is always what we knew Waldorf was about, there's a lot of things that we're keeping the same as we innovate this education. And I want to name a few of them that have been reaffirmed by brain science and our best understanding of child development. The first is that research consistently confirms that concrete experiences are what we need to precede theory in order for learning to sort of take hold, for us to integrate it as our own. And of course, since some of you were just in the early childhood presentation, you'll know that is what the early childhood is all about. It's all experience. And play is the child's first experience after the sensory experiences that they have through the skin contact, through movement. As soon as children are capable of walking, they begin exploring, and that's the earliest play, and then cooperative play comes next, and all of that involves lots of speech and free play, drama, is the essence of learning. And this is directly related to reading. Because if children don't have real life experiences in nature with each other, then the words they read in the texts will never have meaning. So I would like to take, for example, that when children come to learn R-controlled vowels, if you don't know, vowels that are followed by R are extra tricky because they change their sound. We call them sneaky R. Children are often introduced to a book about worms. And worms are great. But a book about worms in first or second grade is so much better if you have held a nightcrawler in your hand and felt it inch across your palm. If you have dug your hands into the dirt, if you crawled on your belly in the mud, then that text will have so much more meaning. You'll be able to connect to it, and you'll have motivation for doing the very hard work. And let's not forget how hard that work is of decoding those words. You will want to know what they say because you have a lot of experience and imagination to bring to them. After early childhood, we continue in this education to give our students deep and meaningful experience through the festivals, the plays, the field trips, the outdoor education, the handwork, the movement, the music, the study of other cultures, the thousands of oral stories they will hear in their Waldorf career. And of course, let's not forget the hands-on science. Lots of real experiences that imbue the reading, the literacy with meaning and context so that it is something that comes alive for them. Brain science has also shown us that oral language is the foundation of written literacy. Spoken language absolutely comes first, and children need to hear words many, many times, and lots of words in order to be good readers. Waldorf has always known this, and the language-rich environment of the early childhood is the perfect precursor to reading. So if you think about, the experience of circle and puppet plays, and where you actually sit down at a table and are expected to have conversation with people at snack, that social conversation, and dramatic free play, you can imagine what a wonderful foundation that is for reading. And I think of my own children who are big kids now, 12, 14, and 17. When my daughter was in kindergarten, she, amazed us, gave us one of those Waldorf moments when her beloved rabbit died and she was sitting on the kitchen floor crying next to his cage. She said, "Mom, I miss Henry so much. I am so forlorn." And we checked with her kindergarten teacher, and indeed, forlorn had made an appearance in the Moon Princess puppet play. And she had taken it right in. Now, in the grade school, of course, our environment becomes a little more academic and language use a little more formal, but it is still rich and varied and constant with all that poetry that they get to recite and memorize, all the stories from many world traditions that they'll hear, great literature like Iliad and Beowulf, and then lots of elevated vocabulary. They memorize and perform plays every year, and they remember those. Let me tell you, my husband has had several cycles, and those students will come back and sometimes be able to recite plays like 20 years later. Oral reports and work with synonyms and antonyms. Today, the 5th grade played a game of hot and cold before in our class meeting, but before we did, we used the thesaurus and they found synonyms, and so we had our own version. We had searing and scorching and frigid and lukewarm and tepid, everyone's favorite, tepid, to play the game of hot and cold. So finally, related to all of that language work as a strong foundation to literacy, but not quite the same, Waldorf has at its heart an understanding of the value of story. And research has shown that indeed, story is the way human beings are most evolved to organize their experiences, to organize the information we take in. We naturally make stories. Now, sometimes we know those stories don't help us and we have to change our stories, but that's what we do. We want things to have a beginning, middle, and end. We naturally create characters and personify things in the world, even if they aren't characters. That's the way our minds work. By using those stories, especially in the grade school, we bring what could be abstract ideas in full color so that children live into them. Steiner said that ideas should live like good friends. And I do think that Waldorf students in the upper school really know what that means, because I have seen them discuss philosophy and electromagnetism with such energy and warmth. I know those ideas are real for them, and I think the color that they bring themselves in their adolescence comes out of the color that the teachers were able to give them in the earlier grades. And then, as happens, they are able to make that on their own. And lastly, I just want to say a brief word about our specialty subjects. as you will have noticed, we spend a lot of time in Waldorf education on these arts, and it's a good half of your child's education. Music, handwork, woodwork, singing, outdoor education. And you might reasonably ask, especially in a time when we know that it takes a lot of time to learn literacy and math to the degree that we want our children to have them, why do we devote so much time to these subjects? And it is because they are inextricably intertwined to the development of intelligence. And we can see that. And research is bearing that out. So, for instance, music is actually a complex language like math or spoken languages. It brings special awareness to timing and number, which relates directly to mathematics. It comes with its own writing system, the study of which develops flexibility of thinking and supports learning other languages. It's also a deeply social art that helps students listen and respond well to others. Handwork and woodwork constantly use applied academics like measuring, complex counting, concepts of symmetry, reading and following directions, which is no small thing. If you've ever tried to follow a pattern, that really does take focus, attention, and intelligence. It also creates this incredible sensory experience of color and texture and line, beauty that enriches children's lives. Movement develops an awareness of internal and external space. And in the grade school, has a really important relationship to helping children understand a more objective reality. Playing games with rules is a really big milestone. And I think it's one of the places that children begin to learn a sense of fairness that moves into a sense of social justice. It's not easy to learn to win and lose, and it's a really important moment. Outdoor education, completely part of our sciences. It is teaching the ability to carefully observe. And in this world where our attention span is now 24 seconds on average, we will move to something else when we're on a computer screen. We need these times sitting in nature and looking at a mushroom and drawing it for 20 minutes, invaluable use of time. And finally, world languages develops an appreciation for other cultures. That was at the heart of Waldorf education when it was developed right after World War I. And it also helps us form a knowledge of language structures that is useful in every language we learn. For many of us, it may be, as it was for me, that the first time you really understood grammar was when you studied another language. It's much easier to see it in somewhere else. So, with so much that's right about Waldorf education, so much that is designed to teach exactly the way students learn, what is it that we now know we can do a little better? As Emily mentioned, we are always learning and growing, and there have been some recent developments, particularly in the science of reading, that really have led us to change some of our practices. So, in sum, the game-changing knowledge that became clear about 30 years ago, but it didn't really change the way education went in the mainstream or here until about 10 years ago, is this. Speech is natural. Our brains are, as they say, wired to do it. If a child is exposed to language and has a typically developing brain, they will become fluent in that language by the age of 5. No problem. Reading and writing are relatively new human inventions, and by no stretch of the imagination could they be called natural. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work to learn to read and write, at least to the standard that is expected by modern times. As I like to tell my students, in the Middle Ages, it didn't matter how you spelled it, everybody spelled it however they wanted. But this level of standardization that we expect and a high level of literacy for everyone, that's really new. And our brains need a lot of time to get it. But not everybody. Research shows that about 15% of the population will have an easy time learning to read and write. For that 15%, if they're exposed to print, if they have a lot of books around, they will just sort of, and someone gives them a little bit of instruction, they'll just sort of pick it up, they'll take off, they'll become fluent readers, They will become fluent readers, they'll proficient writers, not always great spellers, but they'll do really well in all of those realms. As a former English teacher, you can probably guess I was in that 15%. But it turns out those English teachers who found it easy to read were designing methods of instruction that didn't work for most people. Another 15% were at the opposite extreme. About 15% of the population needs one-on-one instruction to learn to read because learning to map sound to symbol is extra hard for their brains. We now know that those people who find that hard often have other gifts in the visual spatial realm and movement. It's interesting how brains work. And then we have the 70% in the middle. 70% of people will learn to read, but to do it, they need systematic instruction in decoding, which is reading, matching sounds to print, and encoding, which is spelling, matching the print to the sounds. Without that systematic, careful, step-by-step instruction over years, that 70% in the middle will read if exposed to print and given some instruction, but they will never read efficiently. The practice that was used in almost all public schools and in Waldorf schools since 1950 was called whole language instruction. It mixed a little bit of phonics with a lot of context clues, with pictures, and it encouraged children to use what they called strategies, which were essentially guessing. For instance, look at the first letter of a word, look at the picture, decide what makes sense. It de-emphasized phonics with the goal of getting books in kids' hands and having them cozy up in the reading corner and read books. And it turned out they mostly weren't reading. They were spending a lot of time looking at the pictures. Students who were instructed in this way often managed to read well enough at first because the very early readers are simple text, and the guessing worked well because there were lots of pictures. But as they moved up through the grades, what pretty consistently happened was they became less and less efficient because they couldn't sound out the harder words, they didn't know how to spell, they were slower readers and poor spellers. This is a national problem. Many people today call it a national crisis. And in any major newspaper in the education section, you can read about how school districts are trying to solve this problem now. The bottom line is that many students in the last 60 years did not have the instruction they needed to become the readers that they could. Waldorf students were among these. And the only thing that's actually different about Waldorf education in this regard, we started a little later with the actual academic instruction, and it turned out that the strengths that we created allowed our students to mask the problem a little bit better. That is to say, our students are experts in stories. They tend to be great storytellers. They understand the arc of narrative. They tend to be awesome conversationalists and debaters. So I can attest with my 5th grade already. They tend to have elevated vocabulary, and they had enough life experience to make really good guesses as they read. They had everything they needed to read except the knowledge about how to crack the code. We now know how to teach children to crack the code. We don't have to guess. The science of reading is clear, and we know what we need to do, and we're doing it. That's the good news. We know now that children benefit from more time to engage with the structured play of sounds of language, so we've added explicit phonemic awareness to the early childhood, which you would have heard about if you were in that presentation, and to our early grades. It turns out the ability to manipulate sounds, to delete sounds and add sounds and inverse sounds is really important as a major building block for reading. We've also learned that children benefit from more time to make the sound-symbol connection. It is a tricky connection for more children, and being introduced to it a little bit earlier and having a few more years to really understand it benefits that 70% in the middle. To meet this need, we are now introducing letters in the last year of early childhood. We continue to make this introduction gradual and filled with life and pictures and stories, because we also know, research tells us, that wherever children have a feeling, a strong emotion, they're more likely to remember it. So stories that create positivity are going to help cement that connection in their minds. And then we come to the grade school, because after children get that basic sound symbol connection, that the letter B makes the sound B, then they need a lot of time to practice blending those sounds into syllables and the syllables into words. And we can't assume that they're just going to do that. We need to help that process along, and lots of time to practice. And this is the work of grades 1 to 3. And that is the foundation of being good readers, decoding, and being good spellers, encoding, and the basis of accuracy, fluency, comprehension, and joy in reading. Now, in doing all of these things, we continue to use our knowledge that children are, first of all, learners in their body. So there's lots of gesture and movement and mapping sounds onto the body, like lots of movement in it. We're using our body to sort of separate and the sounds, hat. Or later on, when words we begin to move into syllables, polygon. That is the key to spelling. If students don't hear each of those sounds, they can't possibly spell them. So the fundamentals of reading are in grades 1 to 3. Beginning in grade 3 and then continuing into grade 4, we are really working on syllables and parts of words called morphemes. So morphemes are the smallest part of word that have a meaning, like the prefix on or the inflectional ending ing. At that same time, in grades 3 and 4, students are really working on what we call the Anglo-Saxon layer of language. So the everyday words that our children learned first, those pretty much all came from German or Anglo-Saxon. They're the shorter words, the easier words, and they follow patterned rules of spelling, like magic E, silent E, or adding S or ES. Which one of those do you add to make a word plural? It turns out that when a word ends with S or CH or X, then you need ES to make plural. In the middle grades, we move into something more complex, into the Greek and Latin layer of language. So it turns out all of the more advanced vocabulary in our language comes from those languages, and so we work a lot with root words. You'll see some examples out on those literacy tables if you take a look. Think of words like benevolent or spectator, formula, contradiction, academic words, science words. Those all come from Greek and Latin. Knowing those words helps students make the leap from stories, where they can kind of guess what's going to happen, to those more academic and scientific texts, where you really need to know what the words mean in order to understand what's going on. And we know students don't stop learning to read in grade 3. We used to have this phrase in education. We teach students to read, so students learn to read, and then they read to learn. But now we know that it kind of continues on. So we continue to teach reading strategies in the middle grades and reading out loud a lot. So here's something I didn't know 5 years ago. It's my final gem about literacy. Being someone who loves to read, I read silently to myself all the time, as anyone does once you sort of get out of school, I just assumed that the sooner children were reading independently and quietly to themselves, the better. What I didn't know is that however your child reads to you, when they read out loud, that's what they're doing silently. They might tell you, oh, no, I'm a much better reader when I read to myself. But if they drop endings, if they make up words, if they add things that aren't there, that's what they're doing when they read to themselves. Fluency requires lots and lots of reading out loud to get practice and to hear how students are actually doing. That turns out to work out very well for our school culture, because older students need lots of opportunities to read out loud, and what better than to read to younger students. So we have reading buddy programs, reading theater in order, bringing in drama, and all of this supports the practice of fluency, which we now know doesn't end at grade 3, it doesn't end at grade 5, but it's really the whole grade school years, grades 1 to 8, Then we're finishing up with the building blocks of literacy, and students can move confidently into the high school with that accuracy and confidence that we want them to take into the next step of their academic careers. So we've made a lot of good changes, I think, in this matter of literacy. But we have also learned a thing or two about math. So I wanted to take a few minutes to finish up about this other foundational skill. So in math, Waldorf is especially famous for, in first grade, the counting of gems or acorns or pine cones. And those manipulatives are wonderful. But it turns out we shouldn't stop with just counting in first grade. We now know that all numbers are expressing a physical relationship, something that's happening in the visual and spatial world. And the more kids can get an experience of that, the better they'll do at, once again, mapping the symbolic onto the real world. In many ways, math and English, they're just two different kinds of language. And the tricky part is being able to remember the relationship of the symbolic to the physical. So we've brought manipulatives all the way through the grades up to grade 6. And you'll see a table out there. I encourage you to explore them. If you ever forgot how to divide fractions, if there was an algorithm you couldn't remember, it may well be because when you learned that process, you learned it as a trick. It was something that you memorized, the manipulation of numbers. But it is representing something real that's happening. So the more we work with Cuisenaire rods and fraction kits, Unifix cubes, students learn to build their number sense up in the physical world and then translate that into number expressions and equations. And the learning that they do is on a much stronger foundation. They can't forget it because they can always recreate it. They understood it when they learned it. So the hands-on is absolutely aligned with the way Waldorf has always, its fundamental values, and it's something that we know a lot more how to do. And the other thing that has been a little adjustment in our math teaching is that we work a lot more now on math reasoning. So teaching something in math, a concept, in several different ways so that students really can understand it. As an example, the traditional algorithm for multiplying multi-digit numbers that you learned, as I did, to multiply the ones and then put the ones digit down here and carry the tens digit and then multiply these two numbers and add this one. Don't forget to cross it out because you'll probably mess it up in your next round. Then you start over here. I don't know why. I was told to put a 0, but I have no idea why. And so on. And then add it all up and you get an answer. Was it the right answer? I had no idea. I had no idea what place value I should be looking at. If this said 494 instead of 2000, I would have had no idea if that were correct. Today, we teach several different algorithms and strategies after we let students play a lot and develop some of their own. And all of them have one thing in common. They make the role of place value much more clear. What's so important about our number system is that a digit completely changes its value depending on where it is in the number. It's hard to remember that here because you're just manipulating numbers and it seems like the place value has no role. But if we take an example like this, I know it's a little hard to see, here I've written the number out in expanded form. So 58 is 50 plus 8. That really helps you remember that this is a 50, not a 5. 43 I write out as 40 plus 3. Again, I remember which is the tens digit and which is the ones. And then I multiply each of these numbers, 50 times 40, 8 times 40, 50 times 3, and 8 times 3, and I add them up. You will see, I invite you to come up afterwards, each of these numbers is somewhere in this traditional algorithm, but they're kind of hidden and hard to see. In this one, is absolutely clear where my thousands and hundreds and ones are, and I can really understand that 58 times 43 is the same as 50 times 40 plus 8 times 40 plus 50 times 3 plus 8 times 3. I can understand deep because I see when I decompose the numbers where the place value is. So teaching more strategies grounded in the way that numbers actually work builds in students a confidence. Once again, if I forget this algorithm, I know how to do this problem 4 different ways at least, and I know I can recreate it. It's really exciting. When children have been educated in this method for a while, they come up with 7, 8 more strategies, ones I never have thought of, and I have to write them down and go home and think about why they work, and then we talk about it the next day. Beware of developing reasoning because they become excellent reasoners. So, in conclusion, I'd like to say our math and literacy curriculum in our Waldorf school is now Common Core aligned, and we love it. Common Core is a research-based curriculum based in the way children actually learn, and in many cases what it's done is actually slowed us down, helped us get the students back into their bodies, working with their hands, and helped us develop multiple ways for them to approach any particular skill. In all of these ways, it's benefited us. And I think it's allowed us to see the things that we always did well in a new and fresh light. Thanks so much for being here tonight, and I'd like to open for questions. Yeah, oh, sorry.
When did the changes go into effect?
Thank you. It's been a gradual process. Our literacy curriculum, the changes really began with Felicia Farr, our last literacy teacher. So I'd say a good 5 years we've been substantially changing our curriculum. A major leap for us was 2 years ago, we began a partnership with the Stern Center, and all of our teachers now in the lower school are working in a 2-year professional development course. It's about 10 hours a month. It's a substantial, it's really been exciting. And our consultant works with us over time, and like we have coaching sessions, regular coaching sessions. She observes us teaching in person and through video, and we've just really been able to hone our skills. So that was a big leap for us. 2 years ago.
I was going to say with mathematics, wouldn't it be a lot easier just to use a calculator?
Exactly.
More efficient.
Right. And rather than have them mimic hats, why don't we just buy them on eBay? Wonderful. Yes.
Cyborgs.
Yeah. Yeah. Steiner said 100 years ago that it does something damaging to the human soul to live in a world where you don't know how anything works. And I think it's true. Even if you don't need to know, it's so good to know how your car works, how your computer works. The students over at the high school have just been recently taking apart a computer and studying it. And one of the things that, again, like I met Waldorf graduates before I found this. And a characteristic of a Waldorf graduate is they really believe they can do anything, and they're right. Not that they know right then, but like they believe I can figure this out. I know how to learn. I know how to ask for what I need. I know how to go look this up. Of course, now that's looking things up on YouTube, right? You can learn anything on YouTube. But they have a confidence because they have such a variety of skills. They've learned to do so many things that they really know how to find out what they need. It's a wonderful quality to take into the world.
I have a book question. I know there isn't per se a library in this school, in this building, but what's the approach for like that sort of wonderful relationship of like piles of books and you reach out and grab one and you're surprised by it, like the idea of a library? How does that function in the lower grades?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So each classroom does have a classroom library. We've been really working on developing our collection again in the last couple of years, particularly, bringing in a lot of great contemporary work, more diverse characters. And then, yes, And you were saying that, did you say something about buying books?
No.
No, just the library.
No.
And then, libraries are so important, it's so interesting that you said that. The upper school just had this fantastic immersion on libraries where they went to Middlebury Library and Yale Library. The 6th grade has started a tradition this year, which I love so much, I'm totally gonna take it next year, where they spend the afternoon in Shelburne every week and then go to the library, and they've had a lot of in-depth work there with the librarian, getting to know the library, so yeah, there is no substitute for a library. And as a small school, we sort of make that where we can in our classroom collections and then seek resources out in the community.
So I should know this, I know, but my child loves my
Oh,
students,
of
but so there's a little bit of a library in every.
Oh yeah,
classroom.
every classroom has several hundred books that we really curate and look to make really exciting collections for each grade. Yeah. Yes.
Abigail, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I'm so in awe of what everyone is bringing to our children, and it almost feels like the school carries so much. And I wonder what you think parents and caregivers can offer the children to support Waldorf education from the home perspective. I know that's such a huge question, it could be a whole other talk, but it feels like we're giving, what more can we do? What would you like to see us doing in our homes?
In the home to support the education? That is such a great question. I really appreciate it. I think there is a lot to say there. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is sleep. And I'm sure if your child is an early childhood, this is not an issue yet. And we are all very protective of our kids getting enough sleep because of the consequences if they don't when they're little. But our culture really makes it hard for children to be rested. And so that's one thing that comes to mind. There is a tremendous pressure to be involved in activities, and that is very positive. Like I don't agree with that, but it can, by middle grades, I see it frequently coming at the cost of sleep. So I would just encourage you to think about that as the greatest contributor to children's health and ours. Let's not forget us in the sleep equation. And then I think, preserving some family culture, which doesn't have to look like, I'm not going to say that the family dinner is sacred. It's great, but if your family can't do it, then is it Sunday breakfast together? Is it bagels out on a, Friday night? Or, yeah, having some aspects of culture, because we're pulled in so many different ways, I think those things are really strengthening to what we do. And I'll keep thinking about it. Anyone else want to say anything about that one? That's a good question for the teachers.
I think you kind of struck on what I would say was rhythm in some sort of way. And your rhythm might not be like a beautiful snack right at the end of the day, but maybe your rhythm is, we eat this granola bar in the car on the way here. Like just making it a rhythm, whatever it might be.
Do we have time for one or two, or?
Yeah, maybe one more.
One more question, okay. So if you do have more questions, we of course want to answer them, so please email Emily or me and we can find a time to address them or put them into another forum. We really look forward to the conversations. Thank you.
Let me just say two things before you go. Thank you again for coming, and in 2 weeks, we will have a curriculum night over at our Bostwick campus for our upper school students, where there will be a day in the life presentation by all the teachers over there, and I strongly encourage you all to come. So thank you all again for coming tonight. Have a wonderful evening.